Hello everybody, this is Matthew Vonston on the line. I hope you are doing well. I wanted to make this disclaimer before we begin the video, because I happen to pronounce the word palette as palette. This is a mistake of mine, but since I am too lazy to re-record everything, you will hear palette instead of palette, and I'm very sorry in advance for that. Hopefully you will enjoy the video still, so have a good watch. Egyptian civilization begins, according to Manetho, with the unification of the two lands, namely Upper and Lower Egypt, under one king. A date often used is around 3100 BC, largely arrived at by working backwards from known astronomical dates tied in with such early original dates or sequences that are known. The essential question is, who was this first king who unified the two kingdoms? Tradition ascribes this feat variously to Narmer or Menes, who may well have been one and the same person. There is also a king scorpion who appears on the scene. Some would place him and Narmer sequentially in a dynasty 0 from around 3150 to 3050 BC. The physical evidence for this comes from the discoveries of J.E. Quibble, excavating at Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt in 1897 and 98. Hierakonpolis was the ancient city of Nekhen on the west bank of the Nile, north of Aswan, and dedicated to the falcon-headed god Horus. The site of the early dynastic town is known as Kom el-Ahmar, literally the Red Mound. Excavations here produced some remarkable finds, including a gold-headed hawk representing the town deity Horus, and an almost life-size hollow-cast copper statue of Pepi I and his son Merenre of the 6th dynasty. The major find in relation to the early dynastic period was made in a pit, labeled the main deposit, located between the walls of an old kingdom and a later Middle Kingdom temple. In the pit, Quibble found objects which have since proved to be the most important documents of the early dynastic period. The principal objects consisted of sculpted palettes and mace heads, although it is not totally clear from the excavator's accounts whether the major piece, the Narmer palette, was found here or in a level nearby. Representations on the pieces and also early-style hieroglyphs identified Scorpion and Narmer. The objects had been deposited long after the period in which they were made, possibly over 1,000 years later towards the end of the Old Kingdom. On the fragmented so-called Scorpion mace head, a king is seen in full ritual dress with the ritual bull's tail hanging from the back of his belt, wearing the tall white crown or hedjet of Upper Egypt, and performing a ceremony using a hoe or mattock. Possibly, he is opening the dikes ritually to begin the flooding of the fields, or he could be cutting the first furrow to the foundation of either a temple here at Hierakonpolis or of a city, as Roman emperors more than 3,000 years later are depicted on coins ploughing the outline of a city at its foundation. Before the king's face, and therefore presumably signifying his name, is a scorpion with a 7-petaled flower above it. The decorated frieze around the remaining top of the mace head has lapwings hanging by their necks from vertical standards. This little bird, Rechit, in hieroglyphs, means common people, and their fate would seem to indicate that they have been overcome by the victorious King Scorpion. Whatever the ceremony being performed, two things seem clear. King Scorpion, wearing the white crown, is king only of Upper Egypt, unless the missing side of the mace head depicted him with the red crown as in as king of Lower Egypt as well. And there has been a battle, and the lapwings have been conquered. The interpretation must be, therefore, that the event is taking place before the unification of Egypt, placing Scorpion before Narmer. Two major pieces from the main deposit at Hierakonpolis refer to Narmer: the Narmer Palette and the Narmer Mace Head. The Palette, a monumental piece of dark green slate, is the earliest historical record from Egypt. It shows a victorious king whose name appears within a serech, the early form of presenting royal names, at the head of both sides between facing heads of the cow-faced goddess Hathor. The hieroglyphs of the royal name are a mudfish depicted horizontally above a vertical chisel, read as the name of Narmer. Narmer is shown in two aspects, wearing respectively the white crown of Upper Egypt, the Hedjet, and the red crown of Lower Egypt, the Deshret, implying that he is now king of both lands. Later, the dual monarchy was to be shown by both crowns being worn together, one inside the other, and forming the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the Shemti. The principal scene, as in the more dominant artistically, has a large figure of Narmer wearing the white crown and smiting with an upraised mace a prisoner whom he grasped by the forelock. This is the earliest occurrence of what was to become an icon of majesty throughout the rest of ancient Egyptian history, right down to Roman times. However, this side of the palette should be the reverse, since on the other side is cut a shallow depression that indicates the humble antecedents of this magnificent piece. It is the scoop in which cosmetic powder, probably green-eye paint, kohl, was crushed. This must then be the upper or obverse side. Here, the king is shown in the red crown, in smaller stature, but still the dominant figure, being larger than any of the other participants. It is notable that on both sides of the palette, the king is shown barefoot, with his tiny sandal bearer, who also appears to have been his seal bearer, to judge from the cylinder seal suspended around his neck, following behind carrying a pair of sandals and what might be a small water jar. The king is twice represented in obviously symbolic and ritual contexts, and it may be that the events are taking place in a sacred area and the king is ritually barefoot, rather like Moses some 1800 years later, as mentioned in Exodus chapter 3 verse 5. Certainly, the god Horus is the king's god, on his side, for as a falcon he holds an enemy, ready for the king's attention by a rope uncomfortably threaded through the captive's nostrils. The frontal face of the goddess Hathor is the dominant aspect of the top of both sides of the palette, and must surely have deep significance in such a prime position. Although Horus was the god of Hierakonpolis or Nehen, and it may be presumed that the principal temple was dedicated to him, it is possible that he is shown on the palette as the younger Horus, who was the son of Hathor, which would explain his mother's dominant role in the palette's religious iconography. To draw analogies from much later in Egyptian history, the two finest remaining temples, both from the Ptolemaic period, are built on much earlier foundations and are respectively dedicated to Horus at Edfu and Hathor at Dendera, and their rituals involved an exchange of processions between them. The Narmer Mace Head also shows ritual scenes, principally the celebration of the Hebsed or Jubilee, Festival of Renewal, where the king is seen seated, wrapped in the appropriate cloak within the pavilion. A cow, possibly Hathor, and her calf also have a prominent place in the iconography. The king here wears the red crown, and his sandal bearer is again in attendance, although the king's feet cannot be seen because of his ground-length ritual robe.